Cut an appropriate length of stockingette. If required, cut a 1 cm slit along edge for the thumb. Roll the stockingette in order to apply more easily by unrolling onto a limb. Remove the wrinkles. Wrap the cast padding onto the limb, starting distally. Avoid wrinkling by stretching or partially tearing material to lay down smoothly. Extend it proximally, overlapping the previous layer by 2/3 so that there is at least 3 layers thickness throughout. Extra padding is required at the ends and bony prominences. The initial layers can be turned down at appropriate landmarks. Hold the end of the plaster roll and soak in room temperature water. Squeeze out excess water. Start wrapping the plaster distally, keeping the roll close to the limb to avoid excessive slack or tightness in the cast. Plaster can be pinched through the first web space. Wrap the plaster proximally, overlapping the previous layer by 2/3 to have a minimum 3 layers thickness. Excess material along one edge can be lifted, tucked, and folded away from the plaster roll to keep the layer flat against the limb. Smooth the plaster to consolidate the layers. Start with a long piece of 3-inch stockingette folded in half. At the midway point, make a slit halfway across the stockingette. Slide the hand through the slit and apply stockingette to the arm like a sleeve up to the axilla. Make a second cut over the dorsum of the wrist and bring the hand through the hole. Loop the free end from the shoulder over the neck and around the wrist. Fasten above the wrist with 2 safety pins. Loop the free end from the wrist around the waist and the upper arm. Fasten at the back with 2 safety pins and cut away the excess stockingette. Ensure that the elbow is at 90 degrees and is firmly applied to the body. Place a piece of web roll between the 4th and 5th fingers. Make 2 1 cm cuts along the same edge of the stockingette and apply to the arm, sliding the thumb through the first hole and the index and middle through the second hole. Position the hand. Start the web roll at the wrist, then wrap around the hand, then the 4th and 5th fingers. The padding should extend 2/3 up the forearm and the 5th fingertip should be visible. Start the plaster at the wrist. Continue around the hand and then wrap the ring and little fingers. Extend the cast proximally. Apply a dorsally directed force to the fracture through the 4th and 5th fingers. The wrist should be in 30 degrees of extension, the MCPs in 70 to 90 degrees of flexion, and the nail beds visible. The proximal landmark is a point 2/3 up the forearm. The distal landmark is the tip of the thumb. Round off the ends of the slab, then wet it and apply to the radial aspect of the forearm, securing with an ace wrap. Position the thumb by forming a key pinch grip with the thumb and index. Ensure that the thumb is in line with the radius and the wrist is in neutral position. Cut a slit in the stockingette at the ankle and overlap the layers. Start the cast padding distally, ensuring 5 to 6 layers around the heel and malleoli with extra protection over the head of the fibula. Extend the padding more proximally for the upper half of the cast. Place the ankle at 90 degrees and start the first layer of plaster at the base of the toes. Wrap figure of 8s around the ankle and extend proximally. Apply a second layer identical to the first. Smooth the layers and fold down padding at the toes. Work a third layer from proximal to distal. For some ankle fractures, mold in inversion. Place the knee at 20 degrees. For upper half of cast, start the padding over the head of the fibula and extend proximally with 4 to 5 layers thickness at the upper thigh. Overlap the old plaster by width of a roll with the new plaster and extend proximally. Repeat with the next roll. Then fold down the padding and wrap the final roll from the thigh distally. Ensure the knee is at 20 degrees of flexion. The cast extends to the upper thigh and all 5 toes are free. Make a slit in the stockingette at the ankle and overlap the ends to avoid wrinkles. Start the cast padding at the toes and wrap proximally. The malleoli and heel needs 5 to 6 layers thickness in total. Extend the padding to just below the tibial tubercle and wrap with 5 to 6 layers to protect the common perineal nerve as it courses around the fibular neck. Ensure the ankle is at 90 degrees. Start the plaster at the toes and wrap the foot and ankle with figure 8s. Continue the first layer proximally, making tucks and folds with redundant material when necessary. Start a second layer of plaster at the toes and wrap as with the first layer, extending to about 2 centimeters below the tibial tubercle. Fold down the padding, ensuring the tibial tubercle and fibular head are free. Cut out a wedge of material to free the 5th toe to its base so as to avoid pressure sores. A third layer of plaster can be started proximally and wrapped distally. Smooth the cast to consolidate the layers. Confirm the ankle is at 90 degrees and all 5 toes are free to move. The curved side of the walking heel is fitted to the medial side of the foot. The anterior border of the tibia aligns with the midpoint of the heel. Center the heel between the 1st and 5th toes. Build a base for the heel with a folded 4-inch slab of wetted plaster. Position the walking heel as previously landmarked. Mold the wet plaster base to the edges of the heel. Secure the heel to the base with a roll of plaster by wrapping around the foot and the edges of the walking heel several times and then consolidate the layers. The curved side of the walking heel is fitted to the medial side of the foot. The anterior border of the tibia aligns with the midpoint of the heel. Center the heel between the first and fifth toes. Build a base for the heel with a folded 4-inch slab of wetted plaster. Position the walking heel as previously landmarked. Mold the wet plaster base to the edges of the heel. Secure the heel to the base with a roll of plaster by wrapping around the foot and the edges of the walking heel several times and then consolidate the layers. The cast saw is generally safe to use near the skin as it has an oscillating motion. Cut the cast by punching through the plaster until a loss of resistance is felt and then move laterally. Repeat the process on the opposite side. Use the spreaders to separate the cast edges. Bandage scissors are used to cut the padding and stockingette to the skin. The cast can then be removed. A cylinder cast extends from about 5 centimeters proximal to the tip of the malleolus to the upper thigh. Start the cast padding distally with about 4 to 5 wraps at the lower end and extend proximally, finishing with 4 to 5 wraps at the upper thigh. Extra padding is required over the fibular head to protect the common perineal nerve. The knee should be at 5 degrees of flexion. Start the plaster distally about 2 centimeters above the end of the cast padding. Extend it proximally, making tucks and folds with extra material when needed. Apply a second layer identical to the first. Fold down the cast padding. A third layer may be started proximally and worked distally. Smooth the layers. Mold at the thigh with lateral pressure. Check that the upper and lower landmarks are okay and the knee is at 5 degrees of flexion. Make a slit in the stockingette at the ankle and overlap the ends to avoid wrinkles. Start the cast padding at the toes and wrap proximally. The malleoli and heel needs 5 to 6 layers thickness in total. Extend the padding to just below the tibial tubercle and wrap with 5 to 6 layers to protect the common perineal nerve as it courses around the fibular neck. Ensure the ankle is at 90 degrees. Start the plaster at the toes and wrap the foot and ankle with figure eights. Continue the first layer proximally, making tucks and folds with redundant material when necessary. Start a second layer of plaster at the toes and wrap as with the first layer, extending to about 2 centimeters below the tibial tubercle. Fold down the padding, ensuring the tibial tubercle and fibular head are free. Cut out a wedge of material to free the fifth toe to its base so as to avoid pressure sores. A third layer of plaster can be started proximally and wrapped distally. Smooth the cast to consolidate the layers. Confirm the ankle is at 90 degrees and all 5 toes are free to move. Cut a length of commercial slab that extends from the toes to below the head of the fibula. Wet the slab and wrap with an ace bandage from the toes extending proximally to the tibial tubercle. Place the ankle at 90 degrees and hold in that position until plaster is hardened. Cut a length of 4-inch plaster slab that extends from the axilla down around the elbow and extends up the arm to the acromion. Wet the plaster and apply to the arm with an ace wrap. Ensure that the elbow is at 90 degrees and the splint extends well up onto the shoulder. Start with the elbow flexed to 90 degrees. The forearm should be in neutral position with respect to pronation and supination. The slab extends from mid-humerus to the palmar crease. Wet the slab and apply along the ulnar border, securing it with an ace wrap. Maintain the elbow at 90 degrees, the forearm and wrist in neutral position, and MCPs free to flex. Place a small piece of padding between the 4th and 5th fingers. The proximal landmark is a point 2/3 up the forearm. The distal landmark is the tip of the 5th finger. Wet the plaster slab and apply to the ulnar aspect of the arm, securing with an ace wrap that includes the 4th and 5th fingers. Position the wrist at about 20 to 30 degrees of extension, the MCPs between 50 to 90 degrees of flexion, and the IPs in slight flexion. Once the stocking head is applied and fracture reduced, start the web roll at the wrist and wrap around the hand several times before extending proximally to 2 finger widths below the antecubital fossa. Fold down the cast padding to the palmar crease and proximal end. Position the wrist in 15 degrees of flexion and 20 degrees of ulnar deviation. Start the plaster wrap at the wrist, then several times around the hand, pinching plaster through the first web space. Extend the cast proximally. Mold the cast with forces directed into ulnar deviation and flexion. The elbow and MCPs should be free to flex and extend. Start wrapping the cast padding over the stocking at the wrist. 2 wraps of padding are required around the hand, partially tearing the material to surround the thumb base. A total of 4 wraps are needed at the wrist. Extend it proximally to 2 finger widths below the antecubital fossa. Fold down the end so that MCPs are free. Start the plaster at the wrist, then wrap around hand twice, pinching the material through the first web space. The wrist should be in neutral position. Extend the cast proximally to the elbow, overlapping the previous layers by 2/3. Once the elbow is reached, return distally. When needed, tuck and fold away from the plaster roll the excess material along an edge. Finish off the roll and smooth the layers to consolidate. Check to ensure the thumb and MCPs are free to move and elbow flexion is unhindered. The distal landmark for the volar slab is the palmar crease. The proximal landmark is a point about 2/3 up the forearm. Cut the material on an angle corresponding to the palmar crease. Wet the plaster slab and apply to the volar aspect of the arm and secure with an ace wrap. The wrist should be in neutral position and MCPs free to flex. Start wrapping the cast padding over the stockingette at the wrist, continuing around the thumb twice, partially tearing padding to lie flat. 2 wraps are needed around the hand, again tearing material to surround the base of the thumb. Continue wrapping proximally to 2 finger widths below the antecubital fossa. Fold down the ends, leaving MCPs free. Start the plaster at the wrist, followed by 2 wraps around the thumb, leaving half of the distal phalanx free, and ensuring the wrist is in neutral position. Continue with several wraps around the hand and base of the thumb, pinching material through the first web space. Extend the cast proximally to the elbow and then return distally. Have the patient make an OK sign and mold in that position. Ensure the thumb is in line with the radius and the MCPs free to move with elbow flexion unhindered.